Hello. Before going to bed, I thought it would be wise to just return to this rumour about Penny Mordaunt, because there's a point which I don't think the newspapers or the pundits are making, and that is that Penny Mordaunt is in a marginal seat. So if she were to become the next leader of the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party were to lose the next election, which is all but certain, at the moment it's 25% down on the Labour Party. I think the Conservative Party has got 24% of the vote. The Labour Party is on 45, 50%. The possibility of getting back up to the point where the Conservative Party is going to win, I think, I think the chances of a Labour Party landslide would mean an election win for the Labour Party, which eclipses all other wins in modern election history. And I don't think that's possible because I don't think the Labour Party has put forward a positive enough image to make that a reality. I think the Conservative Party is deeply unattractive, deeply unpopular, but although there is the adage that elections aren't won, elections are lost, there is also the principle that in order to form the next government, the party needs to be popular too. And I don't think the Labour Party has put itself forward as the popular alternative. I don't get the sensation that I got, for example, in the 1970s when Thatcher came into power, that it was a foregone conclusion, or when Tony Blair came into power, that it was a foregone conclusion. I feel it's much closer to the election that brought in the Conservative, Liberal, Lib Dem coalition. It's much more uncertain. Yes, Gordon Brown lost that election, but no, Cameron did not do enough to win that election, and that was proven to be the case in the ballot box, in the polling stations. So one idea that has come out, you can't imagine Penny Mordaunt putting out the idea. You can't even imagine her supporters, numerous though they may be, putting out the idea that she wants to challenge Rishi Sunak and get rid of Rishi Sunak and stand in his place immediately before an election defeat. And as I say, because she's from a marginal seat, there is every possibility, if people actually stop and think about it, of the Conservatives going into the next election and facing not a Portillo moment of a senior minister losing his seat or her seat, but of something completely unheard of with the Prime Minister losing her seat. That would be an election victory like no other, particularly if it still emerged, if the Labour Party still emerged with a very small minority. Now, the Penny Mordaunt plan apparently has been put forward by Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman, either themselves or by their supporters, with an overarching dark arts plan that Penny would take the party into the next election, that she would lose, and that she would be seen as the moderate who tried, and therefore make way for the right wing of the Conservative Party to take over, for the ERG and Tufnell Lane Park, whatever house, to dictate what happens next. That's the conspiracy theory, and nobody needs to talk about a conspiracy theory about the anxiety in the Conservative Party. We hear things all the time: rabbits in the headlights, the death spiral of the Conservatives, and the efforts to change things. Rishi Sunak is described as somebody who is accident prone. He never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. The hope for recovery is zero under Rishi Sunak. The hope for recovery, I think, under anybody else would equally be zero. But the mutinous party, and particularly as we come up to the May local elections, with a serious thumping in the local elections, the Conservative Party will behave monstrously, and it's always been extremely good at killing its darlings. Now, killing its darlings rather than finding an alternative. Savage first, and then think what to do. I think Rishi's had a very bad week. The collapse of the polls following a budget which didn't really hit home. It certainly not improved the polls. There's not necessarily a big difference, but they certainly haven't improved. And if, for example, the general election were to reflect the polling even at the moment, that's sort of 24% for the Conservatives, that would be probably 400 seats for Labour compared to 120 for the Conservatives. But that won't play out in reality because of the need for such a major electoral shift, which would depend on a more positive dynamic from the Labour Party, which isn't there. So you've got the failure of the budget, but you've still got the promise of income tax, of inflation falling to 2%, and for that prophecy. So that's an opportunity. That's some positivity on a very dark canvas. The second point is the Frank Hester racism issue, and the treatment of Diane Abbott, which I think pretty well guarantees Hoyle's, and the grumbling about Hoyle pretty well guarantees that after 46 refusals to be heard in Prime Minister's questions, Diane Abbott will be reinstated into the Labour Party, which means there won't be any problem with her standing as a Labour Party candidate at the next general election. So far, she's had 10 months of suspension, which is an astronomical amount of time. And I think the Frank Hester thing, why will Rishi not give back the money? Because he's actually in negotiations to get another 5 million. And the Conservative Party feel that they need that money to challenge the polls. Because at the moment it's not about winning the next general election. It's about cutting the losses and making sure there isn't a complete wipeout of the Conservative Party. Well, I think that wipeout is almost certain if Rishi Sunak continues along his present scheme. If he puts all his hope into pushing forward the Rwanda bill, making sure that a flight takes off with somebody in it, even if they're the people who've been given £3,000 because they have failed to gain asylum in this country, and they go off to holiday in Rwanda, at least the plane will be full of something. That's his idea. So it's all about illusion, but that's probably all it's ever been about. It's been a flight of fancy, a dream of Suella Braverman. Remember her dream? My dream is going so well. My propaganda will soon compel migrants to cross across the sea. And I think as dreams go, it's not a very good one, is it really? It's not going to achieve anything, but there we are. It can be passed off as some sort of success. If Penny Mordaunt comes in, she has no money, she has no plan, there is no time. The only thing she can do is call an election. That's her only job. Her job, if she were to come in as Prime Minister, would be to call an election and thereafter appear at the cenotaph and lay a wreath. That is her only future. I can't imagine somebody would want that. And she's one of the more compelling members of the Conservative ranks. If, however, she recognises that she's in a marginal seat and she could well lose her seat at the next election, the idea of becoming Prime Minister before that election happens might appeal. It might appeal. And so we get so the budget, the Frank Hester thing, the fact that the Prime Minister is itching for another 5 million. That of course he doesn't want to return the 10 million. He wants another 5. And finally, the defection of Lee Anderson. Well, Liam Booth Smith apparently cautioned against removing the whip from Lee Anderson. Somebody should have been around to caution against making Lee Anderson vice chairman of the Conservative Party. What a ridiculous thing to do. Ridiculous. I mean, of course, he was a flight risk from the very beginning. He was never going to be a stable chairman of the Conservative Party. He always had his eye on something else, mostly himself. No, I mean, he was bound to go off to reform. It was just a matter of when. And removing the whip gave him that opportunity. So you could say this is all Rishi's fault because Rishi overruled Liam. Well, there you are. You've got it in a nutshell. So more defections are possible. More defections to reform as reform inches up in the polls. Who is Rishi more worried about, reform or Labour? And oddly, Rishi is more worried about reform, I think. He's wrong. He's being foolish. Because when Richard Tice is interviewed, he comes across as a frustrated Conservative. Bring him back into the fold if you're so concerned about that. He talks about being in the competition to create a better conservatism. Well, it's a competition I don't particularly want, but, you know, I don't see my home in the Conservative Party. And I don't really know where my home is politically. I'm homeless. And I don't think I'm the only one. And that's why I think I have a job to make these strange rambling late at night talks. Before I forget, Penny Mordaunt isn't the only person being touted around as a replacement for Rishi Sunak. Grant Shapps, giggle. Here's another one. What has Grant Shapps got to bring to the table? Except that he's not Penny Mordaunt and not Rishi Sunak. But, you know, I think there's an air of desperation travelling around the Conservative Party. I don't think there's very many people who could unite the Conservative Party and bring it forward. I know who I would choose, but I don't think he would put his name forward. But anyway, I'm going to